Warlords of Earth Prologue, the 28th century. Earth is a scarred wasteland, ruled by ruthless warlords battling for supremacy. Civilization has fled to the stars, towering cities on the moon, bustling colonies on Mars, and scattered outposts across the solar system. But the past is never truly buried. In the shadow of a ruined mountain range, a band of scavengers uncovers something impossible, an ancient starship, its hull half buried in the dust of forgotten wars. As they breach the entrance, a signal bursts into the void, an unseen force rippling through the cosmos. Something inside has awakened. The Lunar Authority intercepts the signal. They send their best, an elite strike team trained for the unknown. But they are not the only ones listening. The Warlords of Earth, hardened survivors of endless conflict, have sensed the shift in power, and they will not be left behind. When the elite unit and the warlords cross paths, distrust ignites. But what lurks within the ancient wreck is beyond anything they have ever faced. A monolith, pulsating with energy from a time before history, an artifact that could reshape the solar system, or tear it apart. They came seeking power. What they found is something else, and if they cannot set aside their hatred, it will consume them all. Chapter 1. The Awakening. The desert wind howled through the ruins of old Earth, sweeping across rusted metal and shattered concrete. Beneath the jagged peaks of what was once the Rocky Mountains, a group of scavengers stood at the edge of the impossible. Jace Carter, leader of the scavenger crew, ran a gloved hand over the smooth obsidian-like metal of the ship's hull. "This isn't from any war we've ever known," he murmured. His second-in-command, a wiry woman named Rika, crouched beside an exposed panel, her fingers tracing alien symbols etched deep into the metal. "No records of a ship this size," she said, shaking her head. "And look at this surface. No decay, no rust. This thing's been buried for centuries, maybe longer." The rest of the crew hovered nearby, their usual chatter silenced by the weight of discovery. The ship was massive, its form half buried in rock and sand as if the planet itself had been trying to swallow it whole. Its design was unlike anything in human history, smooth, angular, with an eerie presence that sent shivers through even the most hardened scavengers. Jace exhaled and nodded toward the massive entryway. "Let's see what's inside." With effort, they pried open a hatch, revealing a corridor swallowed by darkness. The air was eerily still. Rika flicked on her wrist light, illuminating the interior. The walls were sleek and seamless, pulsing faintly as if the ship itself were alive. The air smelled ancient, charged with something beyond comprehension. Then a sound, a low hum like a breath taken after a millennium of silence. The walls shivered, lights flickered to life, casting eerie blue shadows along the corridor. "Jace," Rika's voice was a whisper. "I think we just woke it up." The signal high above Earth, on the Lunar Command Center, alarms shrieked. Commander Elias Voss stared at the holographic display, eyes narrowing as a strange signal pulsed from the blue planet below. The frequency was old, predating every known human transmission, yet it carried a sophistication beyond even the most advanced Terran technology. "This isn't possible," muttered Lieutenant Heron, fingers dancing across the interface. "It's transmitting in a pattern, almost like it's calling something." Voss straightened. "Trace the source." A few tense moments passed before the AI assistant confirmed the coordinates. The readings pointed to a sector long abandoned, a wasteland where only scavengers dared tread. "Prep a team," Voss ordered. "We're going down there." The warlords moved far below, in the ruined city of New Denver. Warlord Kane watched the sky, his cybernetic eye flickering as he accessed. A private transmission. The signal was clear. Something OL'd had been found. Something powerful. Kane clenched his fist. If the lunar elites were heading there, so would he. "To the war rigs," he growled to his men. "We ride before the Skyborn claim what is ours." The engines roared as the war machines rolled out, kicking up dust and fire. The Warlords of Earth would not be left behind. The descent, the Lunar Strike Team's ship cut through the atmosphere, sleek and deadly. Inside, armored soldiers checked their weapons, their faces set in grim determination. Their mission was simple: secure the artifact, eliminate any threats. As they neared the landing zone, sensors flared with warnings. Multiple heat signatures incoming, a soldier reported. Ground forces, heavily armed. Voss gritted his teeth. Warlords. The battlefield was set, but none of them truly understood what lay dormant within the ship. Not yet. Chapter 2. Collision Course. The mountain wind screamed as the Scavengers stood frozen at the threshold of the impossible. Jace could feel his heartbeat in his throat. The ship's corridors seemed to stretch endlessly into the dark, their sleek, metallic walls pulsating with an eerie, living glow. Jace, Rika's voice wavered. We should go, now. He shook his head, gripping his rifle tighter. No chance. There's something in here. Something worth more than anything we've ever found. A low, mechanical drone rumbled from deep within the vessel, vibrating through the walls and into their bones. The ship wasn't just waking up, it was responding. Jace turned back toward the entrance, motioning to the rest of the Scavengers. We keep moving, stay sharp. With hesitant steps, they advanced. The Warlords' arrive night fell over the Wasteland, but the horizon burned with the glow of approaching war rigs. Caney stood at the head of the convoy, his massive rusted vehicle kicking up a storm of dust and embers. His warband was nearly 50 strong, mercenaries, raiders, and killers who thrived in the lawless ruins of Earth. A scout pulled up beside him, his face streaked with sweat and soot. The signal's strong, Warlord. It's coming from the old mountain ruins. Caney's cybernetic eye scanned the terrain, then flickered as it magnified the distant valley. The Scavengers were already there, but they weren't alone. A bright streak cut through the night sky, a lunar dropship descending at speed. Caney's lips curled into a grin. Looks like we have company, he turned to his warriors. We take what's ours. No one leaves alive. Engines roared as the war machines charged forward. The lunar strike team, the dropship touched down with military precision. A squad of elite soldiers clad in advanced exosuits disembarked in perfect formation. Their leader, Commander Voss, raised a fist, signaling his troops to fan out. The air was heavy with static electricity. The signal they had intercepted from the ship was unlike anything they had encountered before. The artifact inside was a potential game-changer for the balance of power in the solar system. If it fell into the wrong hands. Sir, one of his officers called out. We have incoming hostiles, Warlords. Voss clenched his jaw. Damn it. He turned toward the looming ship, its dark hull rising like a monolith against the night sky. Time was against them. Move in. We secure the artifact and get out, fast. As the squad advanced toward the entrance, the first war rigs came into view, their headlights cutting through the dust like predatory eyes. A moment later, the first gunshot rang out. The battle had begun. The first shots Jace and his crew ducked as the gunfire echoed through the valley. He cursed under his breath. It was bad enough that the ship was waking up. Now Earth's warlords and the lunar elite were here, turning the ruins into a war zone. We need to move, Rika shouted, before we get caught in the crossfire. But Jace hesitated. The ship was open now, its secrets just within reach. If they left, they might never get another chance. A choice stood before him. Run or risk everything. Then from deep inside the ship, something stirred, and the real nightmare began. Chapter 3. The Monolith stirs. The gunfire was deafening. Tracer rounds split the darkness as Warlord rifles spat fire against the lunar strike team's precision shots. The mountain air reeked of ozone, burning metal, and blood. Jace Carter, crouched behind the alien ship's jagged entrance, gripping his pulse rifle. Around him, his scavenger crew scrambled for cover, caught between two warring factions. Rika was beside him, eyes darting from the wreckage to the approaching war. Riggs, we're stuck in the middle of a damn war zone, she shouted over the chaos. Jace wiped sweat from his brow. Yeah, but we're the only ones inside already. That means we have the best shot at whatever's in here. A metallic rumble reverberated through the ship's interior. The sound wasn't mechanical. It was something older, deeper, The walls of the vessel pulsed faintly, their obsidian-like metal responding to the conflict outside. Then came the voice. A resonance so low it wasn't heard. It was felt. A vibration in their bones and their minds. It spoke in no language, yet every nerve in Jace's body understood the meaning. You have awakened us. The ship trembled. The battle outside became a distant echo as the Scavengers turned toward the dark corridor stretching into the vessel's depths. Something beyond human understanding had been dormant here for centuries. And now, it was waking up. The Warlords pressed forward. Kane reloaded his pistol, firing off 2 quick shots before ducking behind the wreckage of an old transport. The lunar soldiers were well trained, but they weren't ready for a fight on Earth's terms. His warband knew this terrain. They lived in its filth, thrived in its brutality. A roar erupted behind him as one of his lieutenants, a hulking warrior named Varro, let loose with a mounted chain gun cutting through the dust-filled air. "Push forward," Caney barked. "That ship is ours." They had fought over weapons, land, and fuel before, but this was something more. Caney had felt the shift in the air the moment the ship had activated. Power radiated from it. Something vast and unknowable. He didn't trust the moonborn elites to handle it, and so, with a roar of engines, his warband stormed forward, bullets slicing through the night. Lunar Commander Voss makes a choice, Commander. Elias Voss was not a man prone to hesitation. He had been trained in warfare across the system, from the frigid moons of Saturn to the brutal asteroid sieges. And yet, as he stood outside the alien vessel, scanning its shifting walls, something gave him pause. The readings on his visor HUD fluctuated wildly. Biosignatures were appearing, then vanishing. The ship was in flux. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Heron, crouched beside him. "Sir, the Warlords are pushing up. We can't hold this position." Voss exhaled sharply. "Then we take the fight inside. If the Scavengers made it in, we secure them and extract whatever's in there. Move." His team advanced into the ship's entrance, weapons raised. The air felt thick, charged with something unseen. Then the door behind them sealed shut. The depths of the ship, Jace, Rika, and the remaining Scavengers descended into the ship's bowels, the walls glowing softly in response to their presence. The deeper they went, the more their technology failed. HUD displays flickered, wristcoms spat static. And then they saw it. A vast chamber, impossible in size, its ceiling lost to the shadows above. And at its center, a monolith. It pulsed with an ancient, primeval energy. Its surface was smooth, blacker than the void of space itself. Rika took a cautious step forward. "What the hell is this?" Jace could barely breathe. He knew. Somehow, some part of him recognized what they had found. This wasn't just a ship. It was a prison. And whatever had been locked. Inside, it was waking up. Chapter 4. Prison of the Gods. The monolith loomed before them, an abyss of perfect blackness. It pulsed, not with light but with something deeper, something ancient. Jace felt his breath catch in his throat. His fingers twitched near his rifle, but he knew it was useless against whatever lay before him. Rika reached out a trembling hand. "Jace, I don't think this is just an artifact." The ship groaned, the walls vibrating like the hull of a living beast. Symbols flickered across the monolith's surface, twisting, shifting, a language beyond human comprehension. Then the whispering started. Not from the ship, not from the monolith, from inside their minds. "We are bound. We are forgotten. We are not meant to wake." Jace staggered backward, clutching his skull. The words weren't just being spoken. They were being forced into his thoughts. He saw flashes of something vast, incomprehensible. A void beyond the stars. And then, a warning. Leave, or join the lost. Kane breaks through outside. The Warlords pushed harder. Caney's war rigs crashed through the last line of lunar resistance, their makeshift armor shrugging off energy blasts. The battlefield had become a graveyard of burning metal, smoking bodies, and shattered rock. Caney vaulted from his vehicle, his cybernetic eye locking onto the alien vessel's entrance, His warriors followed, spreading out in a lethal formation. The lunar forces had retreated inside. Good. They were now trapped with whatever lay within. His second-in-command, Varro, stepped up beside him, breathing heavily. Whatever's inside that thing, it's got them scared, Caney smirked. Then we take it. He marched forward, stepping over the bodies of the fallen, and disappeared into the darkness of the ship. Voss makes contact. Commander Voss and his squad advanced deeper into the alien corridors, weapons raised. Their comms were dead. The air itself felt thick, resisting their every breath. And then they heard the voices, not over the radio, inside their heads. His Lieutenant Heron collapsed, clutching his skull. "Get out of my head," Voss grit, his teeth pushing forward. He saw movement ahead, figures, scavengers, and beyond them. The monolith. A sudden force pulled at his mind, clawing at his consciousness, whispering in a voice older than humanity itself. They come, the seal weakens, the end begins. Voss raised his rifle, then saw Jace looking back at him, eyes wide with the same horror. "Commander," Jace rasped, "we have a problem." Behind him, the monolith shuddered and something began to stir within. Chapter 5. The seal breaks, the monolith pulsed. A slow, rhythmic thrum rippled through the ship's core, sending a deep vibration into the bones of everyone inside. Jace staggered, gripping his rifle tighter, but he knew in the deepest part of himself, that no human weapon would matter here. Something inside was waking up. Rika pressed a hand to her temple, her face contorted in pain. The voices, they're getting louder. Jace turned toward Voss, who had his own rifle, leveled, his squad fanning out in defensive formation. Their elite armor and precision meant nothing now. The monolith was beyond them, beyond all of them. "We need to leave," Voss growled, stepping closer. "Now." Jace barely had time to register the words before the ship lurched, the metal under their feet shifting like a living thing. A soundless force exploded outward from the monolith, sending waves of pressure crashing through the chamber. And then the first scream echoed. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything human. Cain enters the abyss deep in the ship's corridors. Caney led his warlords through the pulsating veins of the vessel. His cybernetic eye flickered with distorted readings, struggling to process the shifting interior. Every step felt wrong, as if space itself was twisting around them. Varro halted ahead, his grip tightening around his crude yet powerful warblade. "Warlord, the air, it's changing." Caney felt it. The pressure was growing, an unseen weight pressing down on them. The static in the air was alive, crawling over his skin. Then they heard it. A wail, not from ahead, not from behind. From everywhere. It was a sound beyond battle, beyond pain. It was agony woven into the fabric of reality itself, and it came from the core of the ship. Caney's grin vanished. "Weapons up. No one runs." They pushed forward, deeper into the darkness. The monolith unleashed. The chamber trembled. Jace barely had time to react before the monolith split open, not shattered, not cracked. It unfolded. A doorway to nothingness yawned wide, an abyss so black it seemed to devour the light around it. Shadows spilled from within, twisting, writhing. They weren't just figures, they were presences, things that should have never been seen by mortal eyes. One stepped forward, a being of shifting, liquid darkness, with limbs too long, a head that constantly changed its shape, eyes that flickered in and out of existence. Voss's soldiers opened fire. The bullets hit. Then they disappeared, swallowed by the entity as if they had never been fired. The thing turned its gaze on them. We were buried, we were forgotten, now we return. The ship screamed, the nightmare had begun. Chapter 6. Nightmares made flesh. The air inside the ship became thick, suffocating. The darkness that had spilled from the monolith slithered along the floor like a living thing, stretching, reaching, hungry. Jace staggered back, his rifle shaking. in his hands. His instinct screamed at him to run, to escape whatever had just stepped from the abyss. But his body refused to move. The entity loomed before them, its form shifting, melting in and out of shapes. Human, inhuman, something far worse. Its eyes were endless voids, yet Jace felt them seeing him, peering into his soul. "You were not meant to find us." Its voice wasn't sound. It was inside them. A whisper against the inside of their skulls, digging, pulling. Rika let out a strangled sob, falling to her knees. "Jace," she gasped. "We have to." A gunshot cut through the thick silence. Voss had fired. The bullet never landed. The moment it touched the creature's shifting form, it was consumed, swallowed into the abyss that made up its body. A ripple of amusement. No, something darker emanated from the entity. Then it moved. Kane witnesses. The impossible, Kane and his warlords stalked through the alien corridors, their footsteps echoing against the ship's strange, shifting walls. His cybernetic eye pulsed with data, but none of it made sense. The ship's layout was changing, folding in on itself like a labyrinth in motion. Then he heard it. The screams. Not human. Not entirely. The sound carried something else within it. Something ancient. Something that didn't belong in this reality. His warriors tensed, gripping their weapons. Even the battle-hardened killers at his side, men who had torn through enemies without flinching, looked shaken. Varro's knuckles whitened around his blade. "Warlord, I think we're walking towards something we shouldn't." Caney narrowed his eyes. "I don't care what's inside this ship. If it's powerful, I want it. If it's dangerous, I'll kill it." Another scream. Closer this time. Then the shadows ahead shifted and something stepped out. Caney's breath caught. He had seen horrors on Earth's wastelands, creatures mutated by radiation and war, men turned into monsters. But this was something born from the void itself. It turned its abyssal gaze toward him, and then it spoke. "You will kneel, or you will be unmade, the Monolith's prisoners." Jace barely had time to react before the entity struck. It moved like liquid night, its form stretching, elongating, shifting through reality itself. One of Voss's soldiers let out a choked scream as the darkness wrapped around him. And then he was gone. Not dead, not consumed, just erased, like he had never existed. "Fall back," Voss bellowed, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had seen war across the solar system. Jace grabbed Rika, pulling her away as the Monolith's abyss pulsed again. More shadows spilled forth, dozens of them, each taking shape, each bringing a new nightmare into the world. Then the ship itself shook. A deep, earth-rumbling groan reverberated through the walls. The monolith wasn't just open. It was breaking, and whatever had been sealed away for millennia was no longer contained. Chapter 7. The unmaking begins. The world inside the ship was breaking. Jace felt it in the way the air thickened, in the way reality itself seemed to shimmer. The monolith was no longer just an object. It was a wound, a tear in the fabric of existence, and from it spilled the horrors of a forgotten age. Voss and his squad had retreated behind a jagged bulkhead, their weapons raised though they knew they were useless. Every shot they had fired had vanished into the abyssal entities, swallowed without a trace. Rika clutched at Jace's arm. "We have to get out of here." Jace turned, scanning the shifting walls, the pulsating corridors. There was no way out, and then the voice returned. Not spoken, not heard, felt. "The prisoners are free, the unmaking begins." The ship shuddered. From the monolith's gaping wound, the darkness reached out, and the first of them stepped into the world. Kane challenges the Yai. Biscayne did not fear gods, he did not fear death, but what stood before him was neither. The entity had no true form. It shifted, rippling through the spectrum of existence, at once solid and smoke, at once here and elsewhere. Its void eyes fixed on him, their depths whispering of unmade stars and dying realities. Varro's breathing was ragged beside him. "Warlord." "This is beyond us," Caney grinned. Nothing is beyond me. He charged, his warblade igniting with a plasma crackle. He had killed titans, torn through armored divisions, stood unshaken before orbital bombardments. But when his blade met the creature's form, it did not cut. It passed through, as if it had never existed. The entity reached out. Kaney moved to dodge, but it didn't strike. It touched him, and for a moment, just a fraction of a second, he saw. Memories of a dying god Kane was no longer. In the ship, he was somewhere else. A place where the stars were wrong, where the sky was shattered glass, where the ground was not ground but a sea of shifting, screaming voices. Before him the monolith stood, not buried, not dormant, but alive, and around it, chained in ways no human mind could comprehend, were the prisoners, beings of light and darkness, of fire and ash, of concepts beyond mortal understanding. Their forms flickered, their voices a chorus of agony and wrath. One turned its gaze upon him. "You are not worthy." Kaney was ripped back into reality, his body trembling, his breath ragged. The entity still stood before him, its abyssal form shifting, rippling. And for the first time in his life, Warlord Kaney knew fear. The escaped Jace watched as Voss barked orders, his elite soldiers moving in unison, trying to find a way out. But the ship was collapsing, its structure folding into itself as if reality rejected its very existence. "We're trapped," one of the lunar operatives shouted. Jace turned to the monolith. "No, we're already dead if we stay." Rika's eyes widened. "What are you?" Jace stepped forward toward the monolith, toward the wound in the universe, toward the only way out. Chapter 7. The unmaking begins. The monolith stood like a silent sentinel in the heart of the ship, its black surface gleaming with an unnatural sheen. The deeper Jace and Rika ventured into the labyrinthine interior, the more oppressive the air became, thick with a tension that was almost palpable. It wasn't just the architecture of the ship, it was something more, something alive. The walls seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of the monolith itself, as if the ship was not merely a vessel of metal and circuits, but a living, breathing organism. Jace could feel it in his bones, in his very soul, a pressure that weighed heavier with every step they took. The pulse that emanated from the monolith was a constant hum in the back of his mind, a rhythm that was both soothing and disconcerting. It whispered to him, its voice like the wind rustling through an ancient forest, old and forgotten. "This isn't right," Rika muttered, her voice barely a whisper, as if afraid that speaking too loudly would shatter the fragile reality they were trying to hold on to. "We shouldn't be here. We need to turn back." Jace glanced at her, his jaw tightening. He didn't want to admit it, but she was right. Every instinct screamed at him to retreat, to leave this place and never look back. But there was no turning back now. They had gone too far, and they were already entangled in something much larger than themselves. The ship, no, this entire reality was unraveling, and they were standing at the epicenter of it. "We can't," he said quietly. "If we leave now, we'll die here, just like everyone else." His words hung in the air, heavier than the suffocating atmosphere around them. It wasn't just the ship that was falling apart. It was the very fabric of reality itself. The walls seemed to bend and stretch as if the universe was distorting, shifting like water under their feet. Each step felt like it could be their last, as if the ground beneath them could vanish at any moment. They reached the monolith. Its surface was no longer just a smooth black expanse. It was a shifting, writhing mass of tendrils, of shadows that seemed to reach out and grasp at the very air around them. The closer they got, the more Jace felt it. The darkness, the cold emptiness that surrounded the monolith, filling him with a sense of dread that was impossible to ignore. Rika's hand gripped his arm, her fingers cold against his skin. "What are we doing here, Jace?" "We're going to stop it," Jace replied, though even he wasn't sure what that meant. He wasn't sure how they were supposed to stop this thing. The monolith wasn't just a physical object. It was a conduit, a gateway to something much darker, something far older and more powerful than anything they had ever encountered. As he reached out to touch the monolith's surface, the air around them seemed to shudder. The hum of the ship grew louder, a low, throbbing sound that seemed to vibrate through their very bones. Jace hesitated for just a moment, but then he touched it. The moment his fingers made contact, the world around them seemed to fracture. The hum turned into a deafening roar, and the walls of the ship twisted and warped like paper in a flame. The air turned thick, suffocating, and Jace had to force himself to keep breathing, even as the weight of something dark and ancient pressed down upon him. The monolith began to open, not in the way Jace expected. There was no explosion, no dramatic shattering of its surface. Instead, it unfolded slowly, deliberately, as if it was some living thing stretching out of its dormant state. A massive, jagged tear appeared in the monolith's surface, and from within it came a flood of blackness. The void seemed to pour forth like ink spilling from a broken bottle, flooding the chamber and enveloping everything in its path. Jace stumbled back, his heart racing as the air grew colder and colder, until he could see his breath hanging in the air like smoke. His instincts screamed at him to run, but his feet were frozen in place. The blackness was alive. He could feel it creeping into his mind, touching parts of him that should have been hidden, buried deep within his subconscious. "Jace!" Rika cried, pulling at his arm. "We need to get out of here. Now!" But Jace couldn't move. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the swirling mass of darkness that had spilled from the monolith. It wasn't just a void. It was a presence, a consciousness that stretched beyond the limits of their understanding. And it was waking up. "It's not just the ship," Jace whispered. "It's the universe. This is the end." Rika's eyes were wide with terror. "What do you mean, the end?" But before Jace could answer, something shifted in the air. A presence moved in the shadows. From within the void, a figure began to emerge. At first, it was just a ripple, a distortion in the blackness, but then it solidified into something more concrete, a shape, a form. It was tall, too tall, with limbs that twisted and bent in impossible angles. Its face was obscured, a featureless mask of nothingness, but its eyes, those eyes, were what Jace would never forget. They were holes, dark, infinite, bottomless pits that seemed to absorb all light, all color, all life. The thing before him didn't speak in any language he understood. Instead, it was the language. It was the voice of every single thing that had ever existed, and every single thing that had ever been erased. The voice didn't come from its mouth. It came from inside his mind. "You should not have awakened. Peace." The words weren't just a sound, they were a force. A wave of power and destruction that swept through the room, crushing everything in its path. The ship trembled, the walls groaning as if they were being torn apart. The very fabric of reality seemed to quiver, as if the universe itself was being shredded by the force of this presence. Rika screamed, but it was swallowed by the darkness. Jace tried to move, but his limbs felt like they were frozen, trapped in some unseen grip. The darkness wasn't just an absence, it was alive, feeding off their fear, their terror. The thing in front of him wasn't a creature. It was an idea, a force that had existed since the beginning of time, a concept that had been buried, hidden away from the universe. And now, it was free. "What? What do you want?" Jace managed to choke out, his voice trembling as he finally found the strength to speak. The entity did not respond with words. Instead, it showed him. In that instant, Jace was flooded with visions. Visions of ancient worlds, of stars dying in the cold embrace of space, of civilizations rising and falling in the blink of an eye. But these weren't just images. They were memories. He was seeing the end of everything, the death of entire realities, the unmaking of all that ever existed. "We are the end. We were the beginning. All will return to us." Jace's mind began to unravel. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, only exist in the vast nothingness that had consumed him. The monolith pulsed, the dark mass before him swirling, growing, shifting with every breath, every flicker of Thought was being erased. Suddenly, a sharp cry broke through the suffocating silence. Rika. She reached out to him, her face a mask of desperation and fear. Jace, don't give in, you have to fight it. But Jace couldn't. He couldn't fight this. This wasn't something to be fought. It was the end of everything. It was inevitable. And then, just as the darkness threatened to swallow him whole, something cracked, a burst of light, blinding and pure, exploded from the center of the monolith, pushing back the dark force like a shockwave. For a moment, everything was still. Everything was silent, and then the presence spoke again. You will regret this. With a final pulse, the darkness began to retract, retreating back into the monolith, as if the universe itself was being sewn back together. The chamber fell, silent once more. The ship groaned and shifted, but the oppressive weight of the darkness was gone. Jace fell to his knees, gasping for air, his mind reeling. Rika was there beside him, her hand on his shoulder, but even she looked shaken, her eyes wide with terror. And though they had survived the first wave of the unmaking, Jace knew that this was only the beginning. Chapter 8. The Heart of the Void. The aftermath of the encounter with the entity left Jace in a dazed state. His mind was clouded by the overwhelming visions, those flashes of death, destruction, and the cold, inevitable return to nothingness. He was shaken, the sense of weight in his chest growing heavier with each passing second. The entity had only momentarily retreated, but its threat was far from over. The monolith, that dark obelisk that had been their only path to salvation, now stood like a silent sentinel in the heart of the wrecked chamber. It pulsed with faint, erratic rhythms, as though the black core was still alive, still breathing, still waiting for its moment to strike. Jace's chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, the cold sweat on his skin sticky and uncomfortable. Rika crouched beside him, her eyes wide with panic, her breath shallow. Jace, are you okay? Her voice trembled with uncertainty. He looked at her, but words seemed so distant, so insignificant compared to the storm raging in his mind. He could feel the presence of the monolith, pulsing in the depths of his consciousness. The voices were silent now, but they were still there, lingering just at the edges of his thoughts. Every part of him screamed for escape, to leave this hellish place, to run as far and fast as he could. But where could they go? There was no escape from this. The ship had become more than a mere wreckage. It was a trap, a living nightmare, and they were its unwilling prisoners. The fabric of reality was already unraveling, the walls buckling and warping under the pressure of the monolith's pull. Jace's head throbbed with a low ache, as if the very essence of the ship itself was beginning to collapse into the darkness. The hum of the ship grew louder. A chill crept down Jace's spine. He didn't need to look to know what was coming. The atmosphere shifted. The shadows deepened. Time felt out of sync, as though they were no longer bound by the laws of physics. It's coming again, Jace muttered under his breath, his voice hollow. Rika stiffened beside him, her body suddenly tense with dread. What's coming? He turned to face her, his eyes filled with that all-too-familiar sense of dread. Whatever that thing was, it isn't done with us yet. The words had barely left his mouth when the first tremors began to shake the ship. The walls groaned, as though some unseen force was pushing back against them, threatening to tear the vessel apart. The flickering lights overhead began to sputter, casting long, jagged shadows across the room. Jace staggered to his feet, instinct taking over. We need to move now. But as he turned to grab Rika's hand, the chamber suddenly seemed to shift around them, the walls bending and distorting as though reality itself was tearing at the seams. He had no time to process what was happening before the monolith began to throb, a violent, pulsing rhythm that filled the chamber like the beating of a great heart. Then, the voice returned. Not in his mind this time. It came from everywhere. The walls, the floor, the air itself. You cannot escape us. The words sliced through Jace's thoughts, leaving him breathless. The voice was no longer merely an echo. It was an explosion of raw power, and it left him staggering backward, clutching his head. The monolith's surface seemed to ripple, and for a moment, Jace could have sworn he saw something shifting inside. A shape, a presence. It wasn't just an object. It was a gateway, a door. The void was opening once again. Jace's body reacted before his mind could catch up. He grabbed Rika's arm and pulled her away, but as soon as they turned to leave, the floor beneath them shifted, sliding and buckling as though the very foundation of the ship had come undone. "No," Rika gasped, her feet slipping on the shifting floor. "We're trapped." The sound of the ship's groaning structure reverberated around them as the walls began to twist like molten metal. The air grew heavier with each passing second, thick with a power that made it difficult to breathe. The walls seemed to close in, the space shrinking, bending. Reality itself had become unstable. Jace's heart raced as he glanced around the room. There had to be an exit, a way out of this nightmare. But where? The corridor they had come from was no longer visible. Only a dark, pulsating expanse of shadow stretched before them, a dark chasm that seemed to swallow every trace of light. And then he saw it. From the depths of the dark expanse, a shadow stirred. It moved with a mind of its own, twisting and folding around itself. Jace's breath caught in his throat as the figure took form. It was towering, impossibly tall, its form cloaked in a shifting black mist. The shape was human-like, but not entirely. It had the vague outline of a person, but the features were constantly in flux, never staying in one place long enough to be defined. The presence loomed over them, its eyes, if you could call them eyes, glowing with an otherworldly light. The blackness seemed to radiate from it, a void so deep and cold that it made the very air feel suffocating. "You will all be reborn in the void," the entity said, its voice like a cacophony of millions of whispers all merging into one. Jace's heart pounded in his chest as his mind raced. They couldn't fight it. The creature, the monolith, everything in this ship was beyond their comprehension. There was no power in the universe that could stop it, but there had to be a way out. There had to be a way to survive. Rika's voice trembled beside him. "Jace, what do we do?" Jace glanced at her, his mind still struggling to find any logical answer, any solution to their nightmare. But the more he looked at the dark figure, the more he understood. It wasn't just an entity. It was something more, something that existed outside the bounds of time and space. This was the end, a force beyond their understanding, and it was coming for them. He gritted his teeth, his gaze hardening as he steeled himself. He had always survived against the odds, always fought his way out of impossible situations, and now he would do the same. "We fight," he said, his voice unwavering. Before Rika could respond, the ground beneath their feet split open, revealing a vast chasm that seemed to descend into infinity. A cold wind rushed up from the depths, carrying with it a sense of finality, an inevitability that made the hairs on the back of Jace's neck stand on end. The creature loomed closer, its presence growing stronger, pressing in from all sides. Its eyes, those empty voids, burned into Jace as if it could see into his very soul. And then something unexpected happened. From the depths of the chasm, a brilliant light pierced through the darkness. Chapter 9. The light that burns. The light that erupted from the chasm was both blinding and ethereal, pouring into the room like liquid fire. It illuminated the twisted walls and shattered remnants of the ship, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the pulse of the darkness that still clung to the corners of the chamber. Jace's eyes squinted against the harsh brilliance, his instinct screaming at him to shield himself, to hide from whatever had just appeared. But it wasn't a simple beam of light. It was something else, a force, a presence, something ancient, powerful, and for a brief moment it felt like salvation. "Do you see that?" Rika whispered, her voice hushed in awe and fear. She stepped forward, her eyes wide as she gazed at the glowing fissure in the floor. Jace didn't answer immediately, his mind struggling to make sense of the sudden shift in energy. The darkness, the presence that had engulfed them just moments before, seemed to shrink back from the light, recoiling as though it couldn't stand its touch. The air itself felt different now, lighter, less suffocating. The oppressive pressure that had filled the ship for what seemed like an eternity was dissipating, replaced by a strange sense of hope. But that hope was fleeting. The monolith, still pulsing in the center of the room, wasn't retreating. It wasn't giving up. It was waiting. And Jace knew in his gut that whatever was happening now, whatever this light was, would only delay the inevitable. "We need to move," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. Without another word, he grabbed Rika's hand and pulled her toward the opening in the floor. It was wide now, a gaping wound in the fabric of the ship. The light from below pulsed, drawing them in like a magnet. But the air around them was still heavy with the malevolent presence of the monolith, and Jace couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. "What is that thing?" Rika gasped as they neared the edge, her eyes still locked on the brilliant beam of light. "I don't know," Jace replied, "but I don't think we have a choice." They stood at the precipice, staring down into the unknown. The chasm stretched. Out below them, an endless fall into the depths of the ship. The light at the bottom flickered, then stabilized, casting an eerie glow that seemed to beckon them closer. Jace's heart pounded in his chest as he took a step forward, his boots barely making a sound on the metal floor. Every part of him wanted to turn back, to run from the danger that was closing in from all sides. But he knew there was no turning back. They had already crossed that line. "Are you ready?" Jace asked, his voice quieter now, more resolute. He turned to look at Rika, who stood beside him, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "As ready as I'll ever be," she answered, taking a deep breath before stepping toward the light. Together they descended into the chasm. Chapter 9. The light that burns, the light that erupted from the chasm, was both blinding and ethereal, pouring into the room like liquid fire. It illuminated the twisted walls and shattered remnants of the ship, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the pulse of the darkness that still clung to the corners of the chamber. Jace's eyes squinted against the harsh brilliance, his instinct screaming at him to shield himself, to hide from whatever had just appeared. But it wasn't a simple beam of light. It was something else, a force, a presence, something ancient, powerful, and for a brief moment it felt like salvation. "Do you see that?" Rika whispered, her voice hushed in awe and fear. She stepped forward, her eyes wide as she gazed at the glowing fissure in the floor. Jace didn't answer immediately, his mind struggling to make sense of the sudden shift in energy. The darkness, the presence that had engulfed them just moments before, seemed to shrink back from the light, recoiling as though it couldn't stand its touch. The air itself felt different now, lighter, less suffocating. The oppressive pressure that had filled the ship for what seemed like an eternity was dissipating, replaced by a strange sense of hope. But that hope was fleeting. The monolith, still pulsing in the center of the room, wasn't retreating. It wasn't giving up. It was waiting. And Jace knew in his gut that whatever was happening now, whatever this light was, would only delay the inevitable. "We need to move," he said, his voice sharp with urgency. Without another word, he grabbed Rika's hand and pulled her toward the opening in the floor. It was wide now, a gaping wound in the fabric of the ship. The light from below pulsed, drawing them in like a magnet. But the air around them was still heavy with the malevolent presence of the monolith, and Jace couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking straight into a trap. "What is that thing?" Rika gasped as they neared the edge, her eyes still locked on the brilliant beam of light. "I don't know," Jace replied, "but I don't think we have a choice." They stood at the precipice, staring down into the unknown. The chasm stretched. Out below them, an endless fall into the depths of the ship. The light at the bottom flickered, then stabilized, casting an eerie glow that seemed to beckon them closer. Jace's heart pounded in his chest as he took a step forward, his boots barely making a sound on the metal floor. Every part of him wanted to turn back, to run from the danger that was closing in from all sides. But he knew there was no turning back. They had already crossed that line. "Are you ready?" Jace asked, his voice quieter now, more resolute. He turned to look at Rika, who stood beside him, her expression a mixture of fear and determination. "As ready as I'll ever be," she answered, taking a deep breath before stepping toward the light. Together they descended into the chasm. The world around them seemed to dissolve as they moved deeper into the heart of the ship. The air grew colder, thinner, and the further they descended, the more it felt like they were crossing into another realm entirely. The darkness that had consumed the ship began to fade away, replaced by the bright, unnatural glow that surrounded them. But it wasn't just the light, it was the feeling that came with it, the sensation of something ancient and powerful watching them, observing them as if they were part of a much larger, unknowable plan. "Do you feel that?" Rika's voice was faint, as though she were struggling to breathe. Jace nodded, his mouth dry. He could feel it now, the weight of something intangible pressing down on him, something older than the ship, older than anything he had ever known. The light, while it seemed to offer protection, was also suffocating. It was as if the very space they occupied was shifting, pulling them closer to something they couldn't understand. "What is this place?" Jace muttered to himself. The walls around them seemed to change as they descended, shifting from sleek metal to something more organic, almost living. They were no longer in a ship. This felt like a cavern, a vast underground expanse that stretched out in all directions. Rika took his hand, her grip tight. "I don't know, but it feels like we're being drawn somewhere, like this light is leading us to something." Jace said nothing, but he felt it too. The presence of the monolith, that terrifying entity, seemed to fade the further they moved, replaced by an intense calm, a serenity that was both unsettling and calming in its own way. But that calm did not last long. As they reached the bottom of the chasm, the ground before them split open, revealing a massive chamber stretching out into the distance. The walls were lined with strange symbols, glyphs that glowed with a faint, otherworldly light. The air here was thick with energy, alive with an unnatural hum that resonated deep within their bones. Jace's eyes scanned the room, taking in the vast expanse. In the center of the chamber, beneath a towering archway of twisted metal and bone, lay an object. A sphere, smooth and black, with jagged cracks running through its surface. It pulsed with the same light that had drawn them. Here, the monolith, in all its terrible majesty, had led them to this point, and now Jace understood. They were standing before something far more powerful than they could ever imagine. "What is it?" Rika breathed, her voice barely audible in the overwhelming silence. "I don't know," Jace answered, his voice thick with awe and fear. "But it's the source, the thing that's been causing all of this, the monolith. It was just the beginning." He took a cautious step forward, his boots scraping across the smooth metallic floor. The sphere seemed to respond to his movements, the cracks in its surface widening as if it were waking up from some long slumber. The light from within flickered, casting strange, elongated shadows across the chamber. Jace's heart raced. This was the heart of the ship. This was the source of everything, and he was standing in its presence. The ground beneath them trembled, a deep vibration that shook the very air. The sphere began to emit a low hum, its surface rippling as if something was moving inside it, something alive. "It's waking up," Jace whispered, and then, from the far side of the room, a voice echoed through the chamber, a voice that wasn't human, that wasn't even of this world. "You've come, finally." Jace froze. The voice was everywhere, reverberating through the walls, through his mind. It was like a million voices speaking in unison, each one laden with ancient power. The sound of it shook him to his core, and for a moment, he wasn't sure whether he was still standing in the room, or if he had already been pulled into something far beyond his comprehension. The sphere pulsed again, its light growing brighter. The cracks in its surface widened further, and something began to emerge from within. At first, it was a single tendril, slithering out like a dark, liquid mass. Then another, and another. Soon, hundreds of tendrils were stretching out from the sphere, crawling across the floor, across the walls and into the air like living shadows. Jace felt the presence before he saw it. It was everywhere, in the air, in the walls, in the very fabric of the chamber itself. It was the essence of the void, an ancient force that had been waiting for millennia, dormant and silent, until now. The end has come. The voice resonated through the chamber once more, its power overwhelming. And then from the darkness a shape emerged, a creature. It was tall, impossibly tall, its form humanoid but distorted. Its skin was the color of midnight, its limbs long and sinewy. Its face was a blank slate. No eyes, no features, just a smooth, dark surface. But it wasn't the shape that made Jace's heart stop. It was the presence. The creature radiated an energy so pure, so ancient, that it felt as if it were undoing the very fabric of reality with every step it took. "You are too late," the creature said, its voice deep and resonant. "The void will consume all." Chapter 10. The creature in the dark. The air in the chamber was thick with a palpable tension, and every instinct in Jace screamed that they were not alone. The creature before him was like no life form he had ever encountered, its presence unnaturally, cold, an essence of void that seemed to distort the very air around it. The figure towered over them, its body shifting between solid and ethereal, as though it was not bound by the same laws of nature that governed the universe. It seemed to dissolve and reform with each movement, its shape bending as though it existed in multiple realities at once. The voice, the deep, resonant force that emanated from the creature, was like the sound of a distant storm, echoing through the chamber, rattling Jace's teeth. "You are too late," the creature repeated, its tone imbued with finality. "The void will consume all." Jace's body froze, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. He tried to speak, but the words seemed to lodge themselves in his throat. Every part of him told him to run, to turn and flee into the depths of the ship, but his legs refused to move. The creature's presence was suffocating, its very existence like a force that pushed against his mind, his will. Behind him, Rika was barely standing. She had staggered back a few steps, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "Jace, what is that thing? What the hell is it?" Her voice cracked, the tremor unmistakable. Jace swallowed hard, still unable to form a coherent thought. It wasn't just the creature in front of them. It was everything. The walls around them had begun to warp again, the air twisting and distorting as if reality itself was bending. The floor beneath their feet was no longer solid. It felt as though they were standing on the precipice of some vast, unfathomable void. "We don't have much time," Jace finally said, his voice raw. "We need to get out of here, now." Rika's breath caught as she looked around as if searching for a way out. But the room, the chasm, it seemed to have no end, no exit. The pulsing light from the sphere at the center of the chamber grew more intense, casting eerie reflections on the shifting walls. There was no safe place here, no escape. The creature moved then, its limbs stretched unnaturally long, tendrils of shadow unfurling from its form as it advanced toward them. The blackness that surrounded it seemed to deepen, feeding off the light, consuming it as though it were nothing more than a fleeting illusion. The air grew colder still, and Jace felt a chill crawl down his spine, like the very essence of life was being drained from the room. "You will not escape," the creature intoned, its voice now a low, vibrating hum that shook the very air. "This is the end of all things. The monolith was but a key. The real door has now opened." The words hit Jace like a physical blow, his heart pounding in his chest. The monolith was a key? To what? To this thing? His mind raced, trying to understand. The ship had been nothing but a vessel, a conduit for something far greater than they could have ever imagined. And now, they were standing at the heart of it all. "What door?" Rika gasped, taking a step back as the creature drew closer. "What do you want from us?" The creature did not respond with words. Instead, it stretched out a hand, its fingers elongated and tipped with what appeared to be blackened claws. The light flickered in the chamber as the creature's hand hovered just above the floor, and in that instant, Jace felt it. A pull, a tug at the very core of his being. He staggered back, the force of it nearly knocking him off his feet. He turned to Rika, his face pale. "Stay close, do not let go of me." Before she could respond, the creature's voice filled the chamber again. The void was always here. You cannot fight it. You cannot run from it. As the words echoed around them, a series of shimmering cracks began to appear in the air itself. They formed a network of lines, glowing like fire, as if the very fabric of reality was being torn apart. Jace's eyes widened. The door. The cracks widened, and through them Jace could see a vast expanse, a swirling storm of dark energy. It was as though the door was opening to a place far beyond anything that existed in the known universe. Something old, something forgotten. And through that door, the creature's power poured like a flood, surging into the chamber, bending the light to its will. He took a step back. We have to close it. We have to stop it. But how? What could they do? They were powerless against this force. The creature was a manifestation of something far beyond them. This wasn't just an alien being. It was a harbinger, a part of the very fabric of existence itself. Rika's voice broke through his thoughts. "Jace, what do we do? But before she could finish, the creature's outstretched arm moved, and with a single motion, a torrent of shadowed tendrils lashed out, wrapping around Rika's arm. She screamed in terror, but her voice was muffled as the tendrils constricted, pulling her toward the creature. "Rika!" Jace yelled, his voice breaking. He lunged forward, but the tendrils holding her were like iron, unyielding, unbreakable. The creature's presence surged forward, its tendrils pulling Rika closer, its dark eyes glowing with an almost palpable hunger. "She will be the first," it said, its voice now a low growl filled with malice. "The rest will follow." Jace's heart was in his throat as he realized the true nature of the creature's intent. It wasn't just after them. It was after everyone, after the whole of humanity. This was the beginning of the end. The door it had opened was not just a portal, it was a conduit, a pathway for the void to pour into the universe. And once it had passed through, there would be nothing left. "No," Jace muttered, the words barely escaping his lips. His eyes darted around, searching for anything he could use to stop the creature, to break its hold on Rika. "Let her go." The creature, undeterred, laughed. The sound was chilling, like the ringing of a bell in an empty void. "You cannot fight me," it hissed, its form shifting once again. "I am beyond your reach, beyond your understanding. You have already lost." But as the words left the creature's mouth, a sound, a loud, blaring signal, echoed through the chamber, piercing the oppressive silence like a knife. Jace froze, staring around in confusion. "What the hell?" he whispered. The signal came again, louder this time, and then, like a force of nature, a massive crack split the air, and from the fissures in reality, a figure emerged, dark and armored, but unmistakably human. Jace blinked, his heart leaping into his throat. The figure's armor gleamed with an eerie blue light, and the silhouette of a helmet was barely visible beneath a dark hood. The figure stepped forward, and in one swift motion, it raised a device. A gun, but unlike anything Jace had ever seen, aimed directly at the creature. The gun hummed with energy, and in a flash, a beam of intense light shot out, striking the creature's dark tendrils. The impact caused the creature to recoil, its form flickering as if it were being torn apart. For a moment, it screamed, an unholy wail that shook the very air around them. Jace couldn't believe his eyes. The creature was vulnerable. For the first time, it was being pushed back. The armored figure turned toward Jace, its voice cold but unmistakably human. "Move, now. This thing is not what you think." Jace was too stunned to move for a moment, his mouth dry. "Who are you?" he managed to ask. The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it fired another shot and the creature staggered back, its form shifting and twisting, writhing in agony. "We'll have time for questions later," the figure said, its voice firm, urgent. "Get your friend and run, we're not out of this yet." Chapter 11. The gateway. Jace's mind raced as he turned to see the mysterious figure, shrouded in dark armor, face hidden beneath a hood, firing again at the creature that had nearly taken Rika. The beam from the weapon struck the creature's dark tendrils, sending shockwaves through the air. The impact caused the void-like form to shriek, its tendrils recoiling as if burned by the energy. It was like watching a godless beast from the deepest corners of space being wounded for the first time. Rika, still suspended in the creature's grip, was barely conscious, her face pale, eyes wide with terror. Jace's heart pounded in his chest, and every fiber of his being screamed for him to do something, anything to save her. Move, now. The armored figure's voice crackled through the tension, its tone commanding. Jace didn't hesitate. His instincts took over, and he lunged forward, grabbing Rika's wrist with one hand and pulling her toward him with all his strength. The creature's grip tightened for a split second, but with another shot from the mysterious figure, it faltered. Jace didn't think twice as he yanked Rika free from the creature's grasp, pulling her behind him, his breath heavy in his chest. Rika coughed weakly, her legs unsteady, but she didn't resist as Jace guided her toward the far side of the chamber. Get back! The armored figure barked again, as if reading Jace's mind. Another flash of light from the weapon illuminated the room, sending the creature stumbling back once more. Jace finally took a moment to look at the mysterious figure. Tall, armored, with a glowing visor that obscured the face, the figure had a presence that demanded attention. It was clear that this wasn't just some random mercenary or scavenger. Whoever they were, they had a purpose, one that involved the creature they were fighting. Who are you? Jace shouted over the noise, his voice filled with a mixture of confusion and anger. What the hell is happening here? The armored figure didn't turn to face him. Instead, they raised the weapon again and fired, causing the creature to recoil, its form flickering and warping under the onslaught. I'm not here for you, the figure said coolly, as if Jace's questions were irrelevant. I'm here to contain this, whatever it is, and stop it from tearing apart everything. Jace's eyes narrowed as he processed the words. The creature was more than just an alien entity. It was part of something far larger, something that could potentially destroy them all. The mystery of the monolith, the ship, the energy that had led them here. It all started to make sense. They weren't just dealing with an ancient weapon. They were facing the embodiment of an unknown primal force, a force that could annihilate everything. The figure fired again, the weapon's hum vibrating through the air, and with each shot, the creature recoiled further, but not without retaliation. With a sharp, jagged movement, it snapped its tendrils in the direction of the figure, lashing out with terrifying speed. But the armored figure didn't flinch. With a swift, practiced motion, they ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the attack. They pressed a button on their gauntlet, and the weapon whined, charging up for another blast. The creature growled, its voice like the sound of 1,000 voices speaking in unison. You think you can stop the end? The creature rumbled, its form twisting as it spoke. You will not. The void will consume you all. Jace felt the weight of the words, the weight of the creature's presence, settle in the pit of his stomach. But he couldn't afford to be. Paralyzed by fear, not now. Rika, Jace murmured, pulling her close, shielding her with his body as the creature lashed out again. Stay down. Rika nodded weakly, her eyes still glazed with shock, but she understood. She was too weak to stand on her own, too disoriented from the creature's hold. The armored figure's voice once more cut through the noise. You don't have much time, they warned. This thing is a gateway, a passage for the void to enter our world. We need to seal it, or this place will collapse, and it will spread to every corner of the universe. Jace's eyes widened. A gateway. The figure nodded, stepping forward, firing another shot at the creature to keep it at bay. That's what the monolith is, a key. It activates the void, opens it up. I've been tracking this entity for years, trying to stop it before it could break free. Jace's mind raced. Why didn't you say anything earlier? We've been fighting for our lives in this damn ship, and I didn't have a choice. The figure's voice softened slightly, just enough to convey some trace of regret. I couldn't risk you knowing. The fewer people who understood, the better. Jace shook his head. It didn't matter anymore. How do we stop it? The armored figure didn't hesitate. The creature is the anchor. We need to sever its connection to the void, destroy the core it's linked to. That's the only way to stop this. Jace looked back at the creature. It was snarling, its tendrils lashing out again, its black form now swirling in a vortex of darkness. If they didn't act quickly, there would be nothing left of the ship, nothing left of Earth, nothing left of the solar system. Where do we start? Jace asked, gripping the side of the wall for support. There's a control center close to the center of the ship. We need to get there, now. The armored figure moved quickly, aiming their weapon and firing again. Come on. Jace hesitated for only a second before grabbing Rika's arm again. She stumbled, but he steadied her, and they started running. The chamber trembled with each of the creature's strikes, and the walls groaned under the weight of the void's pressure. The doorway to the control center was still far, but Jace felt like time was running out. The creature would only get stronger the longer they delayed. You're not going to make it, the creature howled, its voice dripping with malice as it pursued them. None of you will. But the figure, whoever they were, led the way, guiding them through the maze of twisted hallways, firing bursts of light at the creature when it got too close. Their movements were precise, practiced, like someone who had spent their entire life preparing for this moment. As they neared the control center, the air grew even colder. The pulse of energy from the sphere had intensified, filling the ship, with a low hum, vibrating through every surface. "We're almost there," Jace shouted, his voice strained, but the creature wasn't far behind. "Fools!" it hissed, its dark shape looming in the distance. "You can't escape!" Suddenly there was a deafening crack, and the entire corridor shook violently. The walls buckled, the floor cracked open in jagged lines, and everything seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. The gateway was widening. "Now!" the figure shouted. In one swift motion, the armored figure reached out, pressing a button on the wall that sent a surge of light through the room. The control center's doors slid open and they burst inside. The figure immediately moved to the central console, their fingers flying over the controls. "We need to overload the system. This place needs to be shut down." Jace glanced at Rika, her eyes still clouded, but a faint spark of determination was returning to them. "What do we do?" "Help me hold the creature off," the figure said, not looking up from the console. "We don't have long." Jace nodded, taking a deep breath as he grabbed Rika's arm and pulled her toward a nearby platform. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal, the walls crackling with the void's energy. The creature was close. He could feel its presence, its dark energy pressing in on them from all sides. The armored figure stepped in front of the console, weapon raised, prepared for the next attack. The countdown had begun. They didn't have much time. Chapter 12. The final hour, Jace's hands gripped the cold steel of the platform as he crouched beside Rika. The control room pulsed with an eerie hum, the flickering lights casting strange shadows on the walls. Every second felt like an eternity. The air around them was thick with tension, charged with an electric weight that made Jace's skin crawl. The creature's presence was like a dark shadow, pressing in from every direction, and it was growing stronger with every passing moment. "Don't have long," the armored figure said, their voice firm despite the growing chaos. "We have to finish the overload sequence before that thing breaks through." Jace nodded, his pulse quickening. His heart was pounding in his chest. But his mind was clear. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about saving everything: Earth, the colonies in the solar system, the people they had left behind, and everything that had been built since the fall of Earth. Behind him, the creature shrieked in anger, its voice like nails on metal. Yike! Walls trembled as its tendrils lashed out again, splintering the floor and gouging deep scars into the steel. Jace could feel the floor beneath him shift as the ship's integrity began to break down, the pressure of the void cracking the very foundation of the vessel. The creature was relentless. "It's coming," Rika whispered, her voice shaking. Her grip on Jace's arm was weak, but she was trying to stay focused. Jace didn't turn to look at her. His gaze was fixed on the armored figure at the console, watching as their fingers flew over the controls, inputting commands with precise efficiency. The lights above flickered again, casting everything in an unsettling red glow. "We need more time," Jace shouted over the noise. "How much longer? We don't have more time." The figure snapped back, their voice strained but still determined. "This ship is falling apart. If we don't initiate the overload, the core will stabilize, and the creature will merge with the void. There will be no stopping it then." Jace felt the weight of their words. He had no idea how they could stop something so powerful, but the figure was right. The creature had already opened a gateway, a passage to something far worse than anything they could imagine. If the void spread across the solar system, across the galaxy, there would be nothing left. "What do we need to do?" Jace asked, his voice urgent. The armored figure paused for a moment, their gaze flicking over to Jace. "We need to trigger the core overload, but we can't do it from here. We have to access the central reactor. It's the only way to sever the connection." Jace's heart sank. The reactor was at the heart of the ship, the most dangerous place to be right now. The creature would be there, and there was no guarantee they could make it there alive. "You're telling me we have to walk straight into its lair?" Jace said, incredulous. "Are you insane?" The figure didn't hesitate. "We don't have a choice." The words hit Jace like a cold wave. There was no alternative. They couldn't just sit and wait for the creature to consume them. They had to act, and they had to act now. Jace glanced at Rika, her face still pale, but there was a fire in her eyes now. She was shaking, but she wasn't afraid to face the fight. She nodded at him, her expression set. "Let's do it," she said quietly but firmly. Jace's chest tightened with determination. He stood, pulling Rika to her feet as the figure turned to lead the way. The creature was close now, its tendrils whipping through the air in violent arcs. Each strike sent ripples of distortion through the room, warping the walls and ceiling, as if reality itself was tearing at the seams. "Stay close," the armored figure ordered, and without another word, they led the way through the door that separated the control center from the rest of the ship. The hallways beyond were narrow, their walls scarred with the marks of previous battles, scratches, dents, and gouges from the creature's attacks. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal, and every few steps the floor shifted beneath them, trembling as if the ship itself were alive. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing off the walls, the oppressive silence of the hallways only broken by the occasional groan of the ship. Jace's heart was racing, and he could feel the adrenaline surging through his veins. The countdown was ticking down in his mind, each second another reminder that time was running out. "How much farther?" Rika asked, her voice tight with fear. "Not much," the figure replied, their voice clipped. "The reactor is just ahead." They rounded a corner and came to a large blast door, heavily reinforced with a control panel beside it. The figure approached the panel, their fingers flying over the controls once again. With a low hum, the blast door began to slide open, revealing a massive chamber beyond, the reactor. It was an imposing structure, a massive cylindrical core that hummed with an unnatural energy. The walls of the chamber were lined with conduits, cables, and pipes, all carrying the power that fueled the ship. The air here was heavy with static, and the sound of the reactor's hum filled the room, vibrating through the very bones of the ship. But there was no time to admire the power source. The creature had followed them, its form slithering through the corridors like a nightmare made flesh. Jace's eyes darted around the room, looking for anything, any way to destroy the creature's hold on the ship. The walls were cracked, and the ceiling had begun to warp under the pressure of the void. The reactor itself was flickering, its power surging and pulsing with every beat of the creature's energy. "Hurry!" the figure shouted. "We don't have much time." Jace moved toward the central console of the reactor, his heart in his throat. He didn't know what he was doing, but he could feel the urgency, the overwhelming need to act before it was too late. Behind him, Rika stood with her back to the wall, keeping an eye on the door. Suddenly, the creature's shriek filled the room, loud and deafening, and the air seemed to distort. Jace turned just in time to see the creature's form crash through the doorway, tendrils lashing out like a storm of darkness. "Jace!" Rika screamed, her voice full of terror. The creature moved fast, too fast. Jace barely had time to react before one of the tendrils wrapped around his leg, yanking him off his feet and sending him sprawling to the floor. "No!" Rika shouted, but there was nothing she could do. The creature was too powerful. Jace struggled, trying to free himself from the creature's grip, but it was like fighting against the force of gravity itself. The tendril tightened around his leg, pulling him closer to the creature's gaping maw. He could feel the coldness of its presence, the suffocating darkness that threatened to swallow him whole. "Jace!" Rika screamed again, but there was nothing she could do. In that moment, time seemed to stretch and twist. Jace's mind raced, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was how it would end. There was no way to fight this thing. But then, something shifted. The armored figure stepped forward, firing their weapon at the creature. The blast hit the tendril that held Jace, causing it to recoil, but it didn't release its grip. With a growl of fury, the creature lashed out again, sending another tendril crashing into the figure, knocking them to the ground. The fight was far from over. Chapter 13. The final struggle. Jace's body crashed against the cold metal floor, his vision spinning as the creature's tendril squeezed tighter, threatening to crush the life out of him. He gasped for air, his chest constricted, every muscle screaming in agony as the dark energy of the creature surged through its grip, colder than ice. His thoughts were a blur. The creature, this thing, it wasn't just a mindless monster. It was something far older, far more intelligent. It had been waiting for this moment, for the moment when the Monolith's signal would draw the Scavengers here, to open the gateway, to allow it to invade this world. It had been calculating, lurking in the depths of space, and now it was free. And Jace was its prey. "Jace!" Rika's voice cut through the fog in his mind, sharp and clear. Her desperate cry stirred something inside him. A flicker of hope, in the face of despair. He couldn't die here. Not like this, not without a fight. He refused. The tendril tightened around his body, constricting further, and Jace's heart raced. He could feel the weight of the creature's power coursing through the air, the very fabric of the ship trembling as it came closer to collapsing. His vision began to dim, and his breath came in short, painful gasps. He was slipping. But then, a blinding flash of light shot past him, a beam that struck the tendril wrapped around his leg. The tendril recoiled violently, and Jace was thrown aside, landing hard against the floor. "Stay down!" The armored figure barked, their voice full of urgency. They were already back on their feet, weapon raised, taking aim once more. The figure's armor shimmered with energy as they fired again, the beam cutting through the creature's mass, striking it in its core. The creature howled in pain, its form flickering, warping as though the energy was destabilizing it. Jace blinked, trying to regain his bearings. His head was spinning, but he was still alive. The creature's grip on him had loosened, and he scrambled to his feet, gasping for breath. Rika was just behind him, her hands trembling, her face pale but determined. "Are you all right?" she whispered, her eyes searching him for any signs of injury. Jace nodded, though his body ached from the impact. "I'm fine," he muttered, but his voice was strained. The creature was no longer charging them with the same fury, but it wasn't finished either. It was injured, but its other tendrils were still writhing, searching for new prey, testing their defenses. "We need to keep moving," the armored figure said, stepping forward. "The reactor's not going to hold much longer. If we don't overload it now, we're all dead." The urgency in their voice hit Jace like a slap to the face. There was no more time for hesitation. They had to finish this now. The armored figure turned and began heading for the reactor, their footsteps steady, unyielding. Jace followed, dragging Rika with him, though her legs wobbled beneath her. She was still weak from the creature's earlier attack, but she didn't complain. There was no room for weakness here, not anymore. The reactor loomed ahead, a towering pillar of steel and glowing energy, its hum vibrating through the air. The tendrils of the creature were still whipping through the air, trying to reach them, but they managed to stay out of reach as they moved toward the central console. Jace's heart pounded. They were so close. But the creature was relentless, and it was still hunting them. "Get to the console," the armored figure commanded, their voice low but firm. "I'll cover you." Jace's mind raced. He knew what he had to do, but the thought of getting close to that thing, getting anywhere near its reach, terrified him. He wasn't a soldier. He was a scavenger, a survivor, a man who had never fought anything this powerful. But the situation had long since passed the point. The fear, it was now or never. He nodded to the armored figure, and without another word, he and Rika sprinted toward the console. The creature was closing in, its tendrils slashing through the air with horrifying speed. Jace could see it in his peripheral vision, the black mass of it coiling and writhing like a living nightmare. His heart skipped a beat as one of the tendrils shot toward him, but he dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the strike. The air around him shimmered with dark energy, and the smell of burning metal filled his nostrils as he hit the ground hard. Rika screamed, but she kept running, pulling Jace back to his feet, and together, they pushed forward. They reached the console, and Jace slammed his hands down on the control panel, desperately searching for a way to activate the overload sequence. His fingers flew over the controls, his mind racing. The pressure of the moment was unbearable. "Come on, come on," he muttered under his breath, but nothing seemed to respond. The console was flickering, struggling against the energy field the creature had created. The walls around them groaned under the strain, and the ship's hull buckled, causing the entire room to shake. The creature was closing in. Jace's mind was foggy with panic, but then he remembered. The reactor's core had a manual override. He'd seen it on the schematics. He looked up, scanning the chamber, and there it was, a large armored door that led to the core's manual controls. "Over there," he shouted, pointing toward the door. "We need to reach the manual controls." The armored figure nodded and sprinted toward the door, but the creature was faster. One of its tendrils shot forward like a whip, slamming into the figure and sending them crashing against the wall with a sickening thud. "No!" Rika shouted, her voice laced with terror. Jace hesitated for only a second. Then he dashed forward, grabbing Rika by the arm. "Stay close," he barked, dragging her with him. The creature's tendrils were everywhere now, slashing through the air like serpents, and the room itself was falling apart around them. Jace could feel the ship buckling beneath his feet, the ship's systems collapsing under the strain of the creature's power. They reached the manual controls just as the creature lunged toward them. Jace threw himself forward, slamming into the control panel, activating the override. The door slid open with a low, groaning sound, and they stumbled inside. "Jace, the reactor!" Rika shouted. The reactor was right in front of them, its heart pulsing with a dangerous energy, glowing with an unnatural intensity. They were almost there. But the creature wasn't far behind. Its tendrils had breached the manual control room, reaching for them with terrifying speed. "We have to overload it now," the armored figure shouted, their voice barely audible over the roar of the creature's attacks. "Do it!" Jace's mind raced. He had no idea what he was doing. But then something clicked. The reactor's systems were ancient, old technology from Earth's golden age. The manual override was a fail-safe, a last resort. He slammed his fist down on the emergency lever. There was a blinding flash of light, followed by a deafening roar. The reactor's core began to destabilize, the energy surging in a violent explosion of light and heat. The creature shrieked in fury as the chamber around them imploded. The walls cracked, the ship groaning under the strain. Jace could feel the void pulling at him, threatening to tear him apart. But he didn't stop. He didn't even flinch. "Run!" the armored figure shouted, their voice filled with urgency. "Get out of here, now!" Jace turned, pulling Rika with him, and together they ran through the crumbling corridors, the ship shaking violently as the overload sequence triggered the ship's final collapse. The creature's form flickered, and distorted as the reactor's energy surged through it, destabilizing its connection to the void. But it wasn't dead yet. It was still coming. This is it, Jace thought, his breath ragged, his legs screaming with exhaustion. But he didn't stop running. The ship was coming apart, but so was the creature's hold on it. They reached the exit, the air thick with the stench of burning metal and ozone. The blast doors were closing, and the creature's tendrils were right behind them. With one last burst of strength, Jace dove forward, pulling Rika into the escape pod as the doors slammed shut. The pod's engines fired, and they were thrown back into their seats as it shot away from the collapsing ship. The last thing Jace saw before the pod was ejected from the ship was the creature's form, a swirling mass of darkness, being torn apart by the overload. And then there was nothing but silence. Chapter 14. Into the Void. The escape pod shot through the ruptured atmosphere of the dying ship, its hull groaning in protest as it hurtled toward the cold, endless space beyond. The explosive force of the reactor's overload had sent shockwaves, rippling through the vessel, tearing apart its structure. Now, only the remnants of what had once been a mighty fortress were left behind in the vastness of space. Jace's breath was ragged, his heart pounding in his chest as he sat next to Rika. She was staring out through the viewport, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. The room was silent except for the hum of the pod's engines, pushing them away from the destruction behind them. Yet, there was something ominous in the stillness, something neither of them could quite shake off. Is it really over? Rika's voice was barely a whisper, her hand gripping the seat's armrest. She glanced at Jace, her eyes wide, and he could see the tremor in her hands. It wasn't just the physical toll the battle had taken. It was the weight of everything they'd just witnessed. The creature, the ship, the destruction. It felt like the universe itself was shifting. Jace didn't answer right away. He was staring at the console in front of them, watching as the navigation system recalibrated. His mind was still reeling, the adrenaline keeping him from fully grasping. What had happened? They'd survived, barely, but what now? I don't know, he finally said, his voice strained. I really don't know. Rika nodded, her lips pressed into a tight line as she closed her eyes. They had both been to hell and back, but they were still here, and that was something. It had to mean something. As they drifted further from the wreckage, Jace's thoughts turned to the creature. The thing they had fought, the thing they had barely escaped from, was still out there. The reactor's overload had severed its immediate connection to the void, but it hadn't destroyed it. The creature was too powerful for that. It had only been pushed back into the darkness, perhaps temporarily weakened, but not vanquished. And what about the monolith? The ancient artifact that had triggered the entire sequence of events in the first place. What had they really uncovered? What were they truly dealing with? And was it possible the creature had only been one small part of something even larger, something even more dangerous? Jace's mind kept returning to that moment when they'd first discovered the monolith, the strange signal that had led them to the ancient ship, to the wreckage buried in the mountains. The monolith had called to them, beckoning them with its mystery. But it was far more than they had ever imagined. It had unleashed something from the dark corners of the universe, something that they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Rika's voice broke through his thoughts. Do you think they'll believe us? Jace glanced at her. Who? The others. The colonies. Earth. They'll want to know what happened. They'll have to believe us, Jace replied, though doubt lingered in his voice. The evidence will be there. The wreckage, the readings from the monolith, they'll know we're not lying. But deep down, Jace wasn't sure if anyone could truly grasp the full extent of what they had experienced. The power they had unleashed, the creature that had nearly consumed them, and the ancient forces at work behind everything. It wasn't something that could be explained easily. The people of the colonies, the leaders of Earth, would want answers. But what answers would they be prepared for? And what would happen if they didn't understand? The escape pod continued to accelerate, pushing them farther away from the destruction. But there was something else, a feeling in the air, something unnatural, a kind of pressure building up around them. Jace didn't know if it was just the after effects of the chaos or something else entirely, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The return to the colonies. It had taken them days to finally reach the nearest colony station. The journey back was slow and agonizing. Despite the escape pod's advanced technology, there was something about the vastness of space that made everything feel distant. Their survival didn't seem like an achievement anymore. They hadn't won. Not yet. When they finally docked, they were greeted by a squadron of armed guards, their faces stern as they surrounded the pod. Jace and Rika were escorted from the ship, their bodies still bruised, exhausted, and trembling from their harrowing journey. They were led into a small debriefing room, their hands restrained by cuffs, and waited in silence as the guards began questioning them. They had expected questions, lots of them, but the ones that came were far more serious than they anticipated. "Tell us everything," the captain of the guards said, his voice flat, almost too calm. "From the beginning." Jace glanced at Rika. She met his eyes, and for a brief moment, he saw the same confusion and fear reflected in her gaze. They were just two scavengers who had stumbled upon something far bigger than they had ever imagined. Jace took a deep breath and began telling the story. How they had found the ancient ship, how the monolith had activated, how the creature had come to life, and how they had barely survived the encounter. The captain listened in silence, his expression unreadable. As Jace spoke, he noticed the tension in the room. It was as if the captain was expecting more than they were giving. Jace couldn't tell if it was disbelief or suspicion in the man's eyes, but he had the feeling that their story wasn't going to be accepted easily. Finally, the captain spoke. "And the creature?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "Is gone?" Jace hesitated. "No," he said softly. "It's not gone, it's still out there, and it won't stop coming." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Then why are you here?" Jace looked at him, his heart pounding. "Because we had no choice. We couldn't destroy it. All we could do was delay it. But the monolith, it's linked to something bigger. Something we can't stop." The room fell silent. The tension was palpable. Jace could feel it closing in on him. He had just admitted the truth, the horrifying truth, but now it seemed like the universe was closing in on him, and he didn't know if anyone could truly stop what they had unleashed. Epilogue. The lasting impact months had passed since Jace and Rika returned to the colonies. Their story was met with skepticism, fear, and above all, secrecy. They had been interrogated more times than either of them cared to remember. Their claims dissected by scientists, military leaders, and political officials, each with their own interests and agendas. But the truth was undeniable. The creature was real. The monolith was real. And whatever it had triggered was still out there, drifting in the void, waiting. The governments of the colonies and Earth had rallied together, forming a coalition to contain and study the monolith's signal. It was clear that the event was not an isolated incident, and whatever they had uncovered could change the future of the entire galaxy. They were not alone in their discoveries. Other signals had begun to emerge, faint echoes of the monolith's activation, reaching across the stars. Jace and Rika, once just scavengers, were now part of a greater war, one that spanned far beyond the solar system and stretched out into the very fabric of the universe. They had set something in motion, and there was no turning back. But they weren't alone, not anymore. The colonies, the warlords, even the remnants of Earth's government, they were all banding together, preparing for something bigger than any of them had ever expected. The monolith was not just a relic, it was a key, and in the hands of those who truly understood it, the power to change the fate of the galaxy was within reach. But Jace and Rika knew better than anyone that such power could corrupt, could destroy, could tear the very fabric of reality itself. And so, they stood at the precipice, gazing out at the vast, dark expanse before them. The stars seemed so distant, so cold, but in that darkness they knew there was something waiting, something that might destroy them all. The fight for the future had just begun, and the fate of everything they knew would depend on who could control the monolith, and what. It ultimately unlocked. The end for now. Thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed the story. Let me know in the comments what ideas you would like the next story to be about. Please leave a thumbs up, share, subscribe, comment.